And Scott, welcome to talk with us. And there's so many topics that we could be covering, but what is really burning under my nails is the topic of authentic self and expectations, because to me, you're somebody that is embodying the values of someone that has found their true self and that is living towards what you expect of your lives. And I think, expectations is a funny thing. I actually just this month made my newsletter about expectations, because I feel that when we have expectations, oftentimes the reality isn't necessarily that of our expectation. That automatically leads to disappointment. And the other part of it is we should be doing or should not be doing, and the expectation we have for ourselves. And I think all of these things kind of come together. And I'd love to hear from you, like some of your journey and some of your learnings, and how did you get to a point where you're so at ease and at peace with who you are and what you bring out into the world?
Thank you. First of all, I will modify your description of what I'm feeling inside about who and what I am very slightly, but respectfully. As I'm not just at peace about it, I love it. I love it. I embrace it and I shout it out. And I will say that has been a journey. I was born in England. My biological mother was a British woman that was studying linguistics in graduate school. My biological father had come to London for law studies, and they had an affair. Out came I wasn't wearing suspenders at that age, but out came my little later to be suspenders wearing self. And they were like, oops. We need to do something about this. So I was put up for adoption and raised by a couple of African Americans in rural Kansas. I mention all of that not just as an interesting story, but because the circumstances that I grew up in were so radically opposed to ultimately who and what I was inside. It set me on a journey where there was a constant inner tension, an inner tension between what I felt I wanted to be, what I felt I was capable of, what I felt my destiny was, and what was expected of me, and what was acceptable socially. In rural Kansas, it was a very, very culturally conservative place. A person who looks like me running around with two Black parents was a little weird. Someone like me who is LGBTQA+ or whatever the latest acronym was not necessarily something that people in that community in that era were seeking. And I felt, and not only that, but it was a working class milieu. My mother worked for a dog food factory. My father worked for the state highway patrol. And one of the things that expectations were put upon you in that circumstance was that you would just sort of follow in this very particular limited set of professional pathways. None of them felt right for me. So I would go jogging in wheat fields 7 miles a day just to be by myself and to dream. And then at night, I'd look up at the stars and I'd imagine Funky Town, that cool place where I could just go and really be myself and be free. And so eventually I went on the journey that ultimately took me to law school here in New York City. But I was driven by myths that stayed with me irrespective of where I happened to be living. Moving to that town that was right for me wasn't the solution to my problems. In a way, it only brought them out more. So I went on a whole professional trajectory that was driven by, I'm going to prove to the world, I am not this nobody from the Midwest that's a freak that can't fit in anywhere and can't accomplish and won't accomplish anything. Ultimately, that led to the destruction of my soul. And I mean that. I felt like I had no soul. But when that soul was destroyed and there was fall that came with it, ultimately it opened the door for a revival and the emergence fearlessly of who I am and what I could become.
Wow. That is such an interesting story. Thank you for sharing that with us, Scott. And the things that I'm hearing here that I want to dive in a little bit more is that contrast, right? That difficult time. Like, how often do we feel like, oh, we don't want to go through difficult times? Everybody's looking for the happy times, but really the contrast and the difficult times is the beginning of birth, so to speak, for the solution, and to really step into who we are. It almost has to break down before it can grow again, and grow in a way that is true to who you are.
Absolutely.
And the second thing that I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, and that I really want to have our listeners focus in on, is it's not the environment around us that changes. We can continue running away. We can move to a different city where maybe we feel like, quote unquote, we fit in better, or we have a different relationship, or we have a different job. But it's not what's externally around us. It really has to come from within, if I am understanding you right, because that is where all of that change is happening. And situations will come and find us in a weird way over and over until we learn the certain lessons. Could you elaborate on that? Did I understand that correctly?
You understood it absolutely correctly. Now, there are some situations in which the environment that you're in really can impact your ability to fully actualize as a human being. An example might be if you are someone that is LGBTQ in a society where that leads to a death sentence. Obviously, you're going to want to move. And I don't know, in a sparsely populated area like Kansas, where I grew up, there wasn't a community around that was creative in the sense that I was, in order to fully blossom and in order to fully create a niche for myself. So there are, of course, limits and boundaries beyond which we cannot expect who and what we are to adapt. And part of what we have to be as individuals is flexible enough to understand that. And then if we're unhappy enough, take that risk and go. But that being said, New York City, I'll just use as an example. In the law, which I practiced for a number of years, all the time, not all the time, but many times I would hear attorneys say, I am unhappy here. I've got to move out of the city. The culture of the lawyers here, everyone is hyper competitive who's in the law, and the law firms are mean and they work you to death, and this just isn't the right place. Well, no. And I've seen this a million times. People have moved to Texas, to Chicago, to wherever. And then they've ultimately come back. Lawyers, for instance, are going to be hyper-competitive, driven overworkers, no matter where you go. It's really not about New York City. It's about you. If you are in a place where you have the opportunity to live freely and where there are the actual platforms for you to move in and out of whatever circumstance might potentially enable you to optimize opportunity or your self-actualization, then truly it's up to you. Another thing, I hate everyone in Kansas, I would hear. Oh, or I don't like people here in New York. They're too bossy, they're too loud. So they want to move somewhere else where there are people that are more like them. There are rich diversities of people almost everywhere that you go. Who are you attracting? What are you working to be a friend of the people around you? Are you closed to them? Are you open to what they might have to offer? Are you going to places that might be out of the mainstream to find those that might fit with you? There might be some other people that feel uncomfortable or out of sorts in that location that could be your best friend. That's you. We can build community, we can build support systems, we can even build worlds, literally mythological cosmoses around us if there is a minimal number of people, and we are open to being that friend, that leader, or that support ourselves, and not just expecting it.
That's a great point. I think, to me, like you said something that is key. Who are you attracting?
Yes.
I do believe that actually we are creating our reality. And there are certain people that come into our life because we are attracting them, and we have to learn certain lessons to go through to become who we are. And so that piece of it, being and choosing, making the decision to be that uplifter, to be that person that we would like to see on the other side, could be a first step. And I'd love to hear from you, like, what are the steps, like, for listeners that are here today and that say, yes, I would love to be more at not just at peace with myself, but to your point, to really love myself, of who I am, stand up for who I am, and what I am all about. How do you get from this point of not being that to the point of living more of that authentic self and stepping into the fullness of who everybody is in their own right?
There is a process, and I'm more than happy to discuss that. I'll start by saying, and this goes as to something that we talked about a little bit in the pre-meeting, so if I'm going a little bit ahead of time here, by all means, let me know. But it's actually highly germane to what you're saying. We all live in myths that we create, that define how we're perceiving the world, and in a way, define the world that is attracted to us, as you just mentioned. Understanding that these myths that we're living in are things that we have the power to accept or rewrite puts us in a position where we're going to be able to begin to make those steps to become something else. I'll also add that as we go on a journey to recreate the myths of our lives, to write new ones, to let go of the toxic ones that are saying to us, you can't be this, or no one will like you, or this, that, and the other, into those where we're the hero. Once we do that, we get ignited by an inner sense of power, an inner sense of joy, and an inner sense of connection to purpose and our inner truth values. And when you say what help enable someone to really feel confident, at peace, or even engaged by who and what they are, that is the heart of charisma. If you have connected your purpose to your inner truth values to build a mythological foundation that is on your own terms, that comfort isn't going to just be something you struggle with. It's going to emerge from within. And it's beautiful when it happens.
Yeah, that is a beautiful wrap up, Scott, because made that music. Can anybody out there hear me? Hear me?